What's your scariest real-life story? Story 1. I always parked in a certain spot at my last job for 12 years. That I was there. It was accessible to the public as it was not company parking, but they wanted us to park in the back of the lot so the closer spots could be available for customers. One day my spot was taken by a dark-tinted Cadillac, and I was immediately angry because everyone knew it was mine. It was the morning shift, around 4 in the morning, so it could not be one of the others because I knew what they drove. Maybe a new employee, or perhaps someone from another shop in the plaza. The car was still there during my lunch break when I went home, and even the next day when I came in at 1 in the afternoon until close, around 9:30 at night, and then also the next day. Something about it really bothered me. It smelled wrong. Literally. It was the South, high summer, and who knew what was baking in there? My dad was a Marine and later a police officer. He always said that if you feel something is wrong, it probably is. So I dialed the non-emergency contact police number. I felt like an idiot, but every time I walked by it, it bugged me. I waited for over an hour before anyone showed up. And honestly, if I had not been off the next day, I might have just said forget it. But I waited, mostly because I can be really petty, and that was my spot. The police arrived, all annoyed, probably used to countless "they cannot park here" calls. They ran the license plate, and then things went crazy. They wanted my information, asked me to contact my manager, wanted to know if the lot had cameras, and whether I had touched the car. Apparently, the car was on an Amber Alert as the last sighting of a missing person who was a minor, a 15-year-old girl. When they opened the trunk, they found her body under a blanket. She had been killed, and that was the source of the smell. She had gone out with her much older, controlling boyfriend, but had decided to end the relationship. She only made the mistake of getting into the car with him. He drove 3 counties over after hurting her, left her in the trunk, and walked away. I never learned her exact time of death, so it still haunts me sometimes thinking she might have been saved if I had called sooner. So yes, listen to your gut even if it seems petty. Story 2. I used to sleepwalk when I was a child. We lived in a rough neighborhood in Decatur, Georgia, and I would sometimes wake up outside in the middle of the night, not knowing how I got there, and would have to walk home and step into the darkened doorway I had left wide open for whoever might have been lurking around. However, the time that scared me the most was when I was about 9 years old. I woke up and found myself standing with the bedroom curtains drawn back, staring out the window. As I became aware, I saw a very large and completely hairless man, no hair, no eyebrows, staring at me and slowly inching closer to the window, closer to my face. He looked confused, like he was not sure what he was seeing. At that moment, I realized what was happening and started screaming uncontrollably, frozen in place, while wetting myself in fear. The man screamed too, freaked out, did a tumble, and then ran off in a strange zigzag as if he were dodging bullets. My mom woke up and thought I had a nightmare. The next morning we found a screwdriver on the front porch and damage to the doorframe and handle. I still almost lose it when I tell that story, though now it is usually from laughing. I will never forget the look on his face when I started screaming. His high-pitched scream, or the way he ducked, rolled, and ran, bobbing all the way down the street. Story 3. I was with a man for a couple of years when I realized he had started smoking methamphetamine after work. We already had numerous problems, and I had 3 small children, so I finally made him leave. A few days later, maybe a week, he created a fake social media account and sent me a friend request. The only posts on the page were about ending his life and taking mine and my children's lives first, with details of how he planned to do it that day. The most recent post was a selfie of him in my backyard. A recent one, which meant he had been there. I was on my way home with the kids late in the evening when I saw the request. The day before, I had stopped by my parents' house and gotten my dad's 9mm handgun because my ex had been sending messages through mutual friends about burning my house down. I called the police as soon as I got home, but they did not think it was a big deal and said no officer was available to check my house before we went in. I live deep in the woods, and our small-town police force is limited. I made the kids stay in the car, gave my oldest child instructions on what to do if something happened, and I had to clear my own house in the dark, holding the handgun, afraid he might be waiting for us. I had to check my entire home every time we came back for a while, always terrified that I would eventually find him there. The police were called many times, and after a couple of weeks of ongoing death threats, I was finally granted a restraining order. He died about a year later, and all I felt was relief. Story 4. When I first learned that some of the kindest people can be fighting terrible inner battles, I was in second or third grade. I had a math tutor at the time who was my mother's friend from Alcoholics Anonymous, though I did not understand what that meant back then. She was a kind woman, and the reason I am still good at math to this day. One day she was supposed to come over, but my mother could not reach her, so she became concerned, and we drove over to check on her. When we arrived, we found her lying on the floor, so intoxicated that she could not stand. My mom called an ambulance immediately. Later that day, my mother had to explain to me that my tutor had passed away. That experience taught me that no matter how good things look on the outside, the demons some people carry inside can be moments away from taking over. Story 5. I was on active duty in the Navy, serving aboard a submarine. One day while we were in port, most of the crew had left, and those of us on duty for the night were given permission to bring our children on board for dinner. Halfway through the meal, someone made a 4MC announcement, that is the emergency intercom system, saying there was light smoke in the engine room. Moments later, another announcement followed, fire in the engine room. We trained for this constantly, so everyone moved instantly into action. The commanding officer was still aboard, but on the upper deck. One of our senior enlisted men ran the children to a hatch where the commanding officer was stationed, and he literally threw them up through the hatch while the officer caught them and set them safely on deck. The rest of us rushed toward the fire, and I noticed no one had grabbed a breathing mask. I grabbed a handful of them and followed through the hatch where we were greeted by a light haze filling the entire engine room. But it did not smell like smoke. It smelled sweet. It tasted sweet. An oil pump had ruptured and filled the entire rear half of the submarine with atomized hydraulic fluid. One crewman was seconds away from lighting a torch in that same space just as the emergency was being called. If the alert had been delayed even slightly, we would have walked straight into an inferno. If he had not heard the alert and lit the torch after we entered, we would have been engulfed in flames before we could react. Fortunately, everything turned out fine. We cleaned the oil residue from every surface and repaired the pump. Still, it was surreal to realize how close we had come to a completely different ending. Story 6. When I was 17, my mother's husband suffered a severe mental breakdown and tried to kill her. I was recovering from knee surgery at the time, but I still ran from my room when I heard the commotion. My baby brother, who was 4 years old, was in the room while the man was choking and stomping on my mom. I grabbed my brother, took him out, and told my other siblings to get out of the house and find someone to call the police. I tackled him to pull him off her, pinned him against the washer and dryer, and shouted for her to run. I tried to lock him in their bedroom so I could look for my siblings, but he pushed past me and went into the kitchen to grab a knife. By then, I had called the police. While I was still on the phone, he looked me in the eyes, began cutting himself, and then locked himself in the bathroom, realizing he would be arrested if he stayed alive. What terrified me most was how calm he was when he said, "She's cheating on me, so if I can't have her, no one else will," while I screamed at him. I have no idea how I managed to pull him off her. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall and over 300 pounds. I am 21 now, and to this day I still get jumpy around knives and panic if I do not hear from my mom after she leaves the house. Story 7. A year ago, I was hospitalized with an infection in my right lower leg. The doctors drew a line a few inches below my knee and said that if the infection spread past that line, I would lose my leg below the knee. They pumped me full of antibiotics, and it seemed to work. I had to finish the antibiotic treatment at a nearby rehabilitation hospital. The day before I was transferred, my roommate and I were eating breakfast. He was an older gentleman, and when he slept, he made a strange gurgling noise. I heard him tell a passing nutritionist that his breakfast should have come with 2 coffees. Later that morning, I heard that same gurgling noise again coming from the foot of his bed behind the curtain that separated us. This was still during the coronavirus pandemic. I was about to call a nurse when one rushed in, asking if he was okay. The man was coding. Suddenly, the room filled with nurses and a doctor, all working frantically to save him. It was organized chaos, procedures being called out, medications being administered, one nurse documenting everything on a laptop. I could not go anywhere. I was in the bed closest to the window. They kept pushing my bed closer to make more space. For over an hour, they fought to bring him back. Finally, they called the time of death. The doctor asked for a moment of silence. Then he noticed me sitting up in my bed and came over to ask if I was all right. I said I was, even though tears were in my eyes. Several nurses asked if I needed anything. They took time, even in their exhaustion, to check on me after what I had just witnessed. I asked one nurse to open the window a little, and she smiled, understanding exactly what I meant. It was a bright, sunny day and peaceful outside. Even now, writing this a year later, it still brings tears to my eyes. I heard someone's final words on this earth. "Excuse me, miss, but my breakfast was supposed to come with 2 coffees." Story 8. In the late 1980s to early 1990s in Northern Ireland, I was around 7 or 8 years old. One afternoon, my dad needed to return a library book on Crumlin Road, a Protestant and Loyalist area in Belfast. We were Catholics, and Crumlin Road was notoriously dangerous at that time, still is to some extent. I already felt uneasy, knowing the reputation of the place. My dad seemed calm, though. He told me that if anyone asked, I needed to use a different name, a Protestant-sounding one, because my real name would immediately mark me as Catholic. As we walked, we reached an intersection leading toward the Ardoyne Road, a predominantly Catholic and Republican enclave. Ahead of us, we saw a group of men gathered. One of them ran back and forth between 2 groups relaying messages. Some were watching the Catholic area across the street, while others spoke with a man in a parked car with the engine running. One stood out, tall, long hair, leather jacket, and even as a child, I could tell something felt wrong. My dad's expression shifted. He grew tense and quiet. He had grown up in Belfast during the worst years of the conflict, so he knew when danger was near. We turned right, walking away from the men. That was when a woman with short red hair approached us deliberately. She seemed anxious and distracted. She started questioning my dad, who he was, where we were going, trying to sound casual but clearly failing. I felt my body heating up with fear. It was like a scene from a horror film where someone realizes everyone around them is part of something dark, and one wrong word could give them away. My imagination raced. I saw my dad getting shot, me screaming, maybe both of us killed right there. My hearing dulled like I was underwater. My hand was slick with sweat in my dad's grip. She was clearly part of whatever was happening up the street and was monitoring strangers like us. My dad played it perfectly. Calm, polite, saying just enough without revealing anything. He said we lived in a mixed area, pretending to dislike it, subtly signaling disapproval of Catholics without actually saying so. It was a delicate act, and I was terrified that I might have to speak. When she asked about me, I gave the fake name, my voice trembling. My dad showed her the library book and explained we were only there to return it. Eventually, he ended the conversation with a friendly, "Nice to meet you, all the best," and started walking away, holding my hand tightly. I could feel her eyes on us as we walked. When I looked back, I saw her turn and head toward the men. We rounded a corner onto a long, steep road with the library at the bottom. One side was fenced, and the other had a row of houses. It felt like we were walking into a trap with no easy escape, forward or back. About halfway down, my dad realized we were being followed. He told me to run ahead to check if the library was open. I hesitated, but he insisted. When I looked over my shoulder, I saw the tall man in the leather jacket behind us. My heart pounded as I ran ahead, waiting for the sound of gunfire. The library door was open, so I ran back up. The man had turned around and was walking back the way he came. My dad looked composed, but his shoulders were tight. He told me everything was fine. Later, he explained that once I was far enough away, he had turned to face the man head-on. The man lowered his head and walked off. That same afternoon, within an hour of our visit, a Catholic taxi driver was murdered on that very street. When the news came on television that night, I realized we had walked right into the middle of the planning for a murder. I had seen the people involved, the woman, the man in the leather jacket, and I could have identified them if the police had asked, but my dad never would have risked that. He would never have put us in danger by testifying against a terrorist group. Story 9. When I was younger, I was taken by a couple who offered me a ride home from school and then assaulted me. I shared my story about a year ago on a support forum for survivors and recently posted again on a law enforcement advice forum asking if it would make sense to file a report after all these years. They told me it was unlikely to go anywhere. Since it happened long ago, I never knew their names and I did not know exactly where it took place. Years ago, while walking home from school, a car pulled up beside me. Inside were a man and a woman who seemed friendly and kind. So I let my guard down and accepted their offer for a ride. Once I got in, their tone changed. They said they needed to stop by their house quickly to pick something up. During the drive, they whispered to each other, and I could not understand what they were saying. When we reached their house, they told me to come inside. I knew something was wrong, but was too afraid to say no. The moment we entered, the woman shoved me to the ground and held me there as I kicked and yelled. When I resisted, she hit me hard in the face and said she would tie me up if I did not stop. I begged her to let me go, but she told me to be quiet and do what she said. The man joined in, holding me down. They started removing my clothes while I cried and pleaded for them to stop. The woman ordered me to keep my eyes closed, threatening to hurt me if I looked. Afterward, I was left on the floor, hurt and silent, while they talked to each other as if nothing had happened. They told me to get dressed, so I did. As we walked out, the woman laughed cruelly and commented about the blood on my clothes. She told me I should cover it up. I wrapped my jacket around my waist, too terrified to do anything else. They drove for a few minutes and then stopped by a main road, told me to get out, and drove away. They did not threaten me or tell me to stay quiet. They just left. I walked to a nearby wooded area and collapsed. The pain, both physical and emotional, was unbearable. At first, I could not even cry. I felt empty, like I had left my body. After a few minutes, I finally broke down. I cried not only because of what had happened, but because I knew there was no one I could turn to. My family was abusive. I had grown up being hurt and blamed for things beyond my control. I knew if I told them, they would say it was my fault for getting into that car. I had no friends, no one to help or comfort me. I was completely alone. Even now, I am afraid to tell people in real life because I worry they will see me as broken or weak, especially since I am a man. I still wonder whether that couple was ever caught or if there were other victims like me. I know too much time has passed, but part of me still hopes that one day something can be done. Story 10. My best friend growing up had an aunt who was one of the kindest people I have ever known. She was the type of genuinely devout Christian who truly lived by her faith, always doing good for others, volunteering to help the homeless when she was not working at her church office, and spreading kindness wherever she went. Every weekend, she would give me and my friend $5 each to pick up cigarette butts around the block. Then she would feed us and give us candy. She was simply one of those rare people who radiated warmth and goodness. After some time, she began dating a man from her church who seemed to be drawn to her gentle spirit and compassion. For a while, they seemed happy, but after a few months, he grew jealous, convinced that her kindness toward others, especially men, meant she was being unfaithful. The same kindness that had made him fall in love with her was what he now twisted into a reason to hate her. One afternoon, he waited outside her home. When she returned from work, he attacked her in front of her townhouse, forced her to the ground, and in a moment of unimaginable violence took her life. He then sat beside her, holding what was left of her heart, waiting for the police to arrive. He told them she had deserved to have her heart broken just as she had broken his. The story made the local news and the trial dragged on for months. He was sentenced to around 60 years in prison, effectively a life sentence, given his age. Story 11. I cannot remember my exact age, but I was definitely between 8 and 10 years old, and the memory still haunts me. My father, a black man who grew up in the mid-1950s through the 1960s, faced constant abuse and racism both at home and in society. After high school, he joined the military near the end of the Vietnam War, but the trauma followed him back. He developed a serious drinking and substance problem that I did not fully understand as a child. As often happens, his pain turned outward, and he became abusive, mostly toward my mother. I was the youngest of several children and named after him before later changing my name. Because of my age, I escaped much of the physical abuse, but I witnessed everything. One Saturday night, my siblings and I were watching television while my father was out drinking with his brother. My mother was at a neighbor's house, enjoying a rare moment of peace. A few weeks earlier, my father had been injured at work and was taking strong painkillers, so that night's combination of pills, alcohol, and substances led to disaster. When both my parents returned home, they began shouting, my father accusing my mother of infidelity. He slammed his fists on our large glass table so hard it shattered. The argument turned violent as he began attacking her. My mother fought back while my brother and I stood there crying, begging them to stop. My sister, who was about 13 at the time, jumped on him to defend our mom, and he threw her across the room into a door, breaking it off its hinges. My father's older brother, already in his 60s or 70s, tried desperately to calm him down, but it was like he was possessed. Eventually, my father stormed out, and we thought it was over. My mother sat us on the couch, holding us as we cried, until he came back with a container of gasoline. He poured it over us without hesitation. We did not realize what it was until he poured a line of it outside the door and tried to ignite it with a lighter that, by some miracle, would not work. My sister ran out the back door to another relative's house for help. My uncle managed to stop my father before he succeeded. I remember grabbing onto my father's waist, begging him to stop, saying I had gas in my eyes. That must have snapped him out of whatever madness he was in. He suddenly began apologizing, checking if I was hurt, and then ran out of the house. The worst part is not that my mother did not press charges, or that my father spent only a weekend in jail. It is that he later claimed he had no memory of it. Meanwhile, I think about it almost every day. He is sober now, a completely changed man, and a wonderful grandfather to my siblings' children. I do love him, but what happened shaped me deeply. He is part of the reason I do not think I could ever have children of my own. Story 12. When I was 11 or 12, one of my classmates moved away but invited a few of us to visit him for his birthday later that year. He had made a new friend at his new school and invited him too. We spent the day exploring around his house, and at some point, my friend and his new friend suggested we check out a rope swing in the woods nearby. The swing was nothing more than a long rope with a piece of wood tied at the end, hanging over a steep hillside. It looked dangerous to me, so I said I might try later but would not go first. My friend's new friend volunteered to go. I do not know if he had used it before or was just trying to show off. He grabbed the rope and swung out far over the hill, but at the highest point of the swing, his hands slipped. For a brief second, I thought he might have done it on purpose. Maybe there was a safe landing spot I could not see. There was not. He hit a fallen tree hard and then tumbled forward across rocks. We ran down the hill to reach him, but it was too late. His lips were already turning blue. He had died instantly. That moment changed something in all of us. None of us were the same afterward. It was the first time I understood how quickly life can end. One moment of recklessness, one slip, and everything is gone. Story 13. When I was about 8 years old, I was staying at my uncle's house deep in the woods. The parents had gone out, leaving the 5 of us kids, aged 4 to 14, at home. We decided to play hide and seek in the dark. There were no street lights or outdoor lights anywhere nearby, so once we turned the house lights off, the darkness was absolute. The base was in the living room, and I decided to hide there so I could reach it quickly. My brother, who was 11, was it. He began counting while I hid just a few feet away from him. Suddenly, a lightning strike illuminated the room, and both of us froze. There was a man standing at the window peering inside. When another flash came, we saw him moving toward the front door. My brother, Ben, ran to lock it just as the handle started rattling. He turned on the lights, hoping the intruder would realize someone was home and leave, and shouted for me to lock the other doors. I ran to the kitchen door, locked it, then ran to the sliding glass door at the back of the house. As I reached it, another flash of lightning lit up the yard, and he was standing right there on the other side of the glass. I froze in terror. Ben calmly told me to close the curtain, and I focused on his voice until I managed to do it. My uncle owned guns, but his son was away on a hunting trip, so the only thing we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. Ben stepped out onto the porch holding it, trying to make the man believe we were armed. The phone wasn't working. They had one of those old party line systems, so we couldn't call for help. We tried reaching someone on my uncle's CB radio, but no one responded. Eventually, our older cousin, who was about 15, showed up, and for the first time that night we felt safe, thinking an adult was there. The tension finally broke, but the fear never really left me. Even now, I still remember looking up and seeing that man's face at the window, watching us in the dark. Story 14. When I was 10 years old, I stayed at my friend's house for his birthday. We decided to camp out on the lawn with separate tents for boys and girls. We stayed up past midnight, playing games and laughing, until the girls started trying to scare us by slapping the sides of our tent. We could hear them giggling, so we ran out and did the same back to them. This went on for about 20 minutes before everyone got tired and decided to go to sleep. A little while later, we heard the girls scream. They thought we were outside their tent again, but we weren't. Then suddenly, our tent began to collapse as if something was pushing in from all sides. We yelled and scrambled out, terrified, and ran for the house. Both tents had caved in at the exact same time. Inside, we kept hearing strange noises. Knocking on the walls, footsteps, faint tapping. But when we checked, there was no one there. We eventually fell asleep from exhaustion, but when we woke up in the morning, nothing made sense. There were a few reasons it couldn't have been a prank. The house was on a hill in the middle of nowhere, so it wasn't likely people were out there messing with us. There were no trees nearby, so it wasn't animals. My friend's parents were deeply religious, went to bed early every night, and never pulled stunts like that. And my friend was the oldest child, so there were no older siblings around to cause trouble. To this day, 12 years later, I still can't explain what happened that night. It remains one of the scariest experiences of my life. Story 15. In my city, there's a canal with several bridges crossing it. One of them is a small metal bridge for bicycles and pedestrians. It's made of iron bars with a wooden path in the middle and wide gaps between the bars. When I was younger, maybe under 10 years old, I was biking with my parents and siblings along the canal. My brother and I rode ahead, crossing the bridge first. We were too close together and collided. He fell onto the wooden path, but I tumbled toward the edge and slipped through one of the gaps. The bridge was only about a meter above the water, but I plunged straight into the cold, dark canal. I couldn't swim. Panic took over. I thrashed and managed to grab one of the metal bars, clinging to it desperately. Everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. The freezing water, the weight of my clothes, the terror of not being able to breathe. Suddenly, I heard a splash beside me. My dad had jumped in without hesitation. He lifted me up and pulled me to safety. That was it. It was over as quickly as it had started, but I was left shaking and humiliated. I was too embarrassed to talk about it, and even now at 19, I've only told a few people what happened. Story 16. We were on vacation at Lake Tahoe, and down a long winding path that led to the shore, we spotted a familiar tree. The same one from the photos of our dad taken when we were little. My older brother, younger brother, sister, cousin, and I all started running toward it, though my sister and cousin stopped part way while my brothers and I kept going. The lake looked beautiful and impossibly clear, just like in the pictures. You could see straight to the bottom, the twigs, the roots, everything. My younger brother stood watching as my older brother and I climbed onto this huge rotting log that stretched out over the water. I asked if I could jump off, and he hesitated before saying maybe. He said the water by the shore hadn't felt too cold, so finally he said sure. I looked down, took a deep breath, and started to count. 1, 2, 3. I hesitated for half a second, then jumped. The water hit me like ice. For a moment, it felt refreshing. Then suddenly, I couldn't keep myself afloat. I started sinking fast. Panic filled my chest, and I gasped, screaming my brother's name. I could see the fear in his eyes as he debated whether to jump in after me, knowing it could drag us both under. I managed to grab onto some submerged branches of the old tree, clinging with everything I had. My brother reached for me and helped pull me out. I was shaking violently, numb all over, my legs and stomach covered in scratches and small cuts from the debris at the bottom. As we walked back, my body still trembling, I started sobbing uncontrollably. For a few moments, I honestly wondered if maybe I had actually drowned, and what I was living now was just my brain trying to ease me into death. When we got home, I took a long shower, but I couldn't stop shaking. I haven't been able to look at that lake the same way since. Story 17. When I was 12, my city had this massive Halloween cornfield attraction, complete with haunted houses and costume actors jumping out to scare people. It was always packed. That year, my friends and I decided to go together. My parents were strict and anxious about my safety, so they told me I could only go if parents were coming along. I lied and said there would be. There weren't. It was just 6 of us 12-year-olds on our own. Everything was fun at first. We ran through the haunted trails, screamed and laughed. Then I needed to use the bathroom, so I went to the portable toilets while my friends waited outside. When I came out, they were gone. At first I thought they were hiding to scare me, but after calling their names and searching around, I realized I was completely alone. Panic set in. I started crying, unsure what to do. That's when a police officer walked up to me and asked if I was okay. I told him I couldn't find my friends, and he said he would take me to the ticket booth so they could make an announcement for them to meet me there. He took my hand and said we just needed to stop by his squad car first to let another officer know. As we walked through the dark parking lot, something about it felt off. Then I remembered something my dad had told me a few days earlier, a story about a little girl who was kidnapped by someone pretending to be a police officer. He had warned me that even if someone claimed to be a cop, I should always ask to see a badge and insist they call my parents before going anywhere. My heart was pounding. I stopped walking and said, "I'm sorry. This is silly, but my dad told me I have to ask to see your badge and for you to call my parents." The man's face turned pale. He froze for a second, then suddenly let go of my hand and bolted. Full sprint into the dark. Shaking, I found my phone and called my parents. They rushed to pick me up and quickly found real officers nearby. When I told them what happened, they said that taking a child to a squad car first wasn't protocol, and that the attraction didn't even have a loudspeaker system for announcements. We filed a report, and it hit me later just how close I had come to disappearing that night. Story 18. I was born and raised in the southern United States, but moved to Minnesota in the early 2000s. My plan was to attend the University of Minnesota for its atmospheric science program, but I ended up not enrolling and instead lived with friends. During that time, I started dating a woman from Canada. My home was about a 4-hour drive from the border, up in Minnesota's Arrowhead region. Just after Christmas that year, I was driving back home after visiting her. It was around dusk when I left. Her house was an hour from the border. I crossed back without any trouble and started driving south along Highway 61, the same route I had taken countless times before. For those who don't know, Highway 61 runs right along Lake Superior, and at that hour it's mostly empty except for locals or the occasional trucker heading between Duluth and Thunder Bay. The weather was clear, the road was dry, and I was cruising along at about 60 miles per hour. Then I hit a patch of black ice. In an instant, I lost control. My car spun off the highway, and I had no idea whether I was going to end up crashing into the woods or sliding into the icy lake. By some miracle, I veered toward the woods, rolled multiple times, and landed upright. The car came to rest in a shallow ravine, hidden from view unless someone was really looking. It was freezing, single digits at most. And this was before everyone had cell phones. There was no signal anyway, not out there. I was alone, freezing, and terrified that another vehicle might hit the same ice patch and crash into me. I don't know how long I was out there before a local man stopped and found me. He called for help and took me to the hospital. Somehow I only had a few cuts and bruises, plus the effects of the cold, but I was alive. Later, when we returned to the crash site, a state police officer said that by all accounts, I should have died. If not from the crash itself, then from hypothermia. The man who found me was named John. He let me stay at his home for 3 days until a friend from Duluth could come pick me up. I eventually moved back south, but John and I kept in touch by email for years. He passed away in 2018 at 70 years old, and I still think of him often. That night, I had been alone on a deserted, frozen highway in the dark, convinced I was going to die. John saved my life, and I will forever be grateful to him for that. Story 19. Many years ago, I was out Christmas shopping and got into a car accident. I was in a left-turn lane, slowing down, when another car suddenly pulled out in front of me. I hit their driver's side door head-on. After the shock wore off, I made sure the people in the other vehicle were all right. They called the police and an officer came to file a report. Both cars were too damaged to drive, so we waited for tow trucks. The men in the other vehicle were all wearing suits, and soon, more men in suits arrived in a black van to pick them up. The officer told me the crash was my fault, but said I wouldn't get a ticket because there was no proof. I was frustrated because she never even asked for my version of events. She only spoke to the men from the other car. When I questioned it, she told me that the men were government agents. I got angry and asked if that was why I was being blamed. She insisted it wasn't and then left me alone in the cold parking lot waiting for my ride. When my ride came, they took me straight to the body shop where both vehicles had been towed so I could get my belongings. While there, I took several photos of both cars. Later, I called my insurance company and mentioned what had happened. The agent sounded confident and told me, "We're not going to be intimidated." I felt relieved, like someone was finally on my side. I told him I had taken photos and he asked me to send them. I did immediately. A week later, I still hadn't heard anything, so I called to follow up. To my shock, the same agent told me my photos proved I was at fault. He explained that the damage pattern showed the other car was stopped and that I must have sped into it. I was furious. It made no sense. And I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had pressured the insurance company into siding against me. I decided to let it go since I had no way to fight it, but that's when things turned disturbing. Government agents came to my home, saying they needed to question me about the accident. I refused. Not long after, the same two men from the crash showed up at my workplace. It was far too coincidental to believe they were just there to shop. It started to feel like I was being watched. My boss even asked one day if I had ever had run-ins with the bureau, because someone had called asking questions about me. Nearly a year later, my insurance agent called again, saying federal investigators were reopening the case in connection with a possible injury claim. He asked if I wanted to make a statement. I declined. The whole experience left me deeply uneasy. I went from being a regular citizen with no reason to distrust authority to someone who now understood how easily the truth could be twisted. Even if you've done nothing wrong, power can bend the facts to fit its own version of the story. That accident left me with more than just car damage. It left me with a lifelong fear of how fragile innocence really is. Story 20. When I was around 20 years old, I was still living with my parents and younger siblings. One night, I was watching television when my 16-year-old sister came in, yanked the remote out of my hand, and switched the channel to something she wanted to watch. She was taller than me by several inches and had a temper that made standing up to her pointless. If I tried, I would end up hurt and somehow still get blamed for it when my parents got home. She had always been the favorite, never faced consequences for anything, at least not until she got older and started getting into real trouble. So I let her have the remote and sat through her show, scrolling on my phone to pass the time. When her show ended, she walked off to her room without saying a word. Another episode came and went, 45 minutes later, and she still hadn't returned. So I finally switched the channel back. About 20 minutes after that, she stormed back into the living room and demanded I turn it back to her show. I told her no, it had ended anyway. Her face twisted, and her voice came out as a guttural scream. Her eyes looked almost black with rage. I refused again, and she stomped out of the room so hard that the furniture rattled. Then I heard drawers opening in the kitchen. When she came back, she was holding a steak knife. Her voice was low and trembling when she said she was going to make me pay. I froze for a second before she lunged at me. I ran, dodging around the coffee table as she chased me, waving the knife. I sprinted down the hall, slammed my bedroom door, locked it, and threw my weight against it. We lived far out in the country, and my cell service was useless. The landline was in the kitchen, out of reach. I heard the doorknob rattling as she ordered me to open up so she could kill me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Those child-safe locks could be opened with a coin, so my body pressed against the door was the only thing keeping her out. After a few minutes of shouting and shaking the handle, she stopped and walked away. I stayed there until my parents came home. When I told them what had happened, they brushed it off completely, acting like it was a childish argument. I replayed that night in my head for weeks, wondering what I could have done differently. But the truth was, nothing would have mattered. When she decided to rage, there was no stopping her. A few weeks later, it happened again. Same setup. She stole the remote, changed the channel, left before her show ended, came back angry and grabbed the same steak knife. This time when she came after me, I ran straight to the kitchen and pulled out the biggest cleaver from the knife block, the one no one used but my dad still kept razor sharp. She stopped in her tracks when she saw me holding it. Her eyes still burned with fury, but I wasn't backing down. She told me to put it down. I said no. She yelled it again, and I snapped, shouting, "Come make me then." We stood there staring at each other in silence. Then without a word, she turned around, walked past me, and went back to her room. I don't remember if she set her knife down or not, but I kept the cleaver in my hand for a long time afterward. When my parents got home, either they didn't notice or didn't care enough to ask. She never came at me with a knife again, though that didn't mean she stopped finding other ways to lash out. Eventually, I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder because of the years of living in fear of her. Some family members still tell me to let the past go and try to have a better relationship with her, but they've never been cornered, screamed at, or chased by someone who wanted to stab them over a television show. Some of my relatives have finally seen her true nature, though, and at least now I know I'm not the crazy one. Story 21. Starting when I was about 12 and lasting into my early 20s, I experienced something I can only describe as seeing and hearing shadows. It didn't happen every day, but a few times a week I would see dark, human-like figures. Not silhouettes exactly, but shapes made of shadow, standing or moving as if they were alive. Sometimes they would whisper or walk around or appear just long enough for me to feel the air shift and the hairs on my neck stand up. Most of the time it happened at night, but not always. There were times in broad daylight when I glimpsed one standing just out of reach, watching. One night when I was about 13, I woke suddenly with that unmistakable feeling of being watched. I always kept a light on while I slept. It was the only way I could relax. But that night, the light in my room looked different. The color was off, redder and dimmer than it should have been. My bed was pushed into a corner of the room, the wall to my right, the door across from me. When I turned toward the wall beside me, I froze. A shadow figure was there, flat, pitch black, sharp against the wall like ink spreading under glass. For several seconds, I just stared at it, unable to breathe. Then right before my eyes, it began to peel off the wall. It bent over my bed, folding toward me as it let out a screech so horrible and inhuman that I still can't describe it properly. I leapt from my bed and ran for the door, but when I grabbed the handle, it wouldn't move. I pulled and twisted and cried out, but it was like it was welded shut. When I turned back, the shadow was gone. I tried the handle again, and this time it turned easily, like nothing had been wrong. I ran down the hall sobbing into my parents' room, curled up on their floor, and eventually cried myself to sleep. My parents took it seriously. They were religious people and called our pastor the next day. He came and prayed over the house and in my room. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. Even now, decades later, I still wake at the smallest sounds. That was the only time one of those things ever acknowledged me directly. But I could always hear them. Faint footsteps, low murmurs, sometimes laughter, in every home I lived in after that. That night was the first and last time one of them looked at me, and that was enough to haunt me for life. Story 22. In the summer of 2004, I was 11 years old and living in northern Michigan. It was a quiet little community where everyone left their front and back doors open at night to let the heat escape. Only the thin mesh of screen doors kept the bugs out. The nights were usually filled with the sound of insects buzzing and the occasional rustle from outside. But it always felt eerie, knowing that the only thing separating you from the dark outside was a fragile sheet of mesh. It was late, maybe around midnight. I had just turned off my video game and was getting into bed when I felt an uneasiness coming from my window, which faced the front yard. The first thing I noticed was that the crickets had gone silent. Normally, the air was alive with sound, but now there was nothing. It was like when you walk too close to a cricket and it suddenly stops singing, except the silence stretched wide, as though the whole night was holding its breath. Then I heard it, the sound of chains dragging slowly through dirt. It was faint at first, maybe 5 feet from my window. I knew that sound instantly. It wasn't metallic clinking, but a deep, heavy scrape, stopping and starting as if someone were walking with it, taking steps in rhythm with the drag. It grew louder as it passed by my window. I could almost feel the vibrations through the floorboards. My heart hammered in my chest. The bugs were still silent, and all I could think about was how easily whatever it was could see me through the screen. After what felt like forever, though it was probably only 10 seconds, the sound faded down the side of the house. I lay frozen, staring at the window, too afraid to move. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. The next morning, I told no one. I wanted to prove to myself that it was nothing, that I had imagined it. So I went outside to look for clues, but what I found made my stomach drop. In the dirt about 5 feet from the front door were 2 deep, parallel lines, drag marks, stretching from the front yard around the house. They passed under my window, around my brother's, and continued toward the backyard fence. The lines were about a foot apart, carved neatly through the grass and dirt. I followed them, opening the fence gate where the marks continued. They cut straight across the sandy backyard, circling toward the opposite side of the house where the second gate was. When I reached that point, the tracks disappeared into the grass. But I had seen enough. The marks surrounded nearly the entire house, as if something had deliberately dragged chains around it in the middle of the night. To this day, I don't know what it was, a person, an animal, or something else entirely. But on that hot July night in 2004, while everyone slept with their windows open, something walked around our house dragging chains through the dirt. And whatever it was, it wanted to be heard. Story 23. This happened back in 2013. I had always been the kind of person who dreamed vividly, and that night was no different. I dreamed I was back in school, sitting in a chemistry lab surrounded by Bunsen burners. The smell of burning chemicals filled the air. When I woke up, that same acrid, smoky smell was still there. I sat up, disoriented, and thought maybe my uncle had burned something while cooking. I went to the kitchen, and to my surprise, he came out at the same time with the same worried look. He said he had heard a strange crackling sound and thought maybe it was hail. We stepped outside to check, and that's when we saw it. The house was on fire. He ran for the garden hose, and I bolted back upstairs to grab my phone and call 911. I remembered we had a fire extinguisher downstairs, so I headed for it. As I opened the door, my cat Bailey darted out, terrified, and ran upstairs, straight into my room. My heart dropped. The dispatcher told me help was on the way, but our area relied on volunteer firefighters, and every station nearby was already on another call. It took nearly 30 minutes before they arrived. By then, my other uncle had come over. He used to be with the fire department, and he jumped in to help. The flames seemed to be under control for a while, mostly contained to one side of the house. From outside, it didn't look too bad. We thought we'd beaten it, but the fire had spread through the roof's crawl space, right where my bedroom and the attic met. My room was partially built into that area, and the fire had moved above it. About an hour into the chaos, my uncle came over quietly, his face pale. He told me they had found Bailey. She hadn't made it. At first, I thought he was joking. He had a dark sense of humor sometimes, and I actually hit him in the chest, demanding he take it back. But he wasn't joking. The moment it sank in, I broke down completely. I screamed and sobbed so hard that the neighbors must have heard me. Hours later, when the firefighters finally cleared us to go inside, the house was a wreck. Smoke, water, and ash had ruined almost everything. The upstairs, my bedroom, the bathroom, and the hallway was completely destroyed. Even now, I can still remember that night, the burning smell that woke me, the red glow against the walls, and the way Bailey ran toward the danger instead of away from it. I still think about whether she waited for me to come back for her, and that thought breaks my heart every time. Story 24. When I was about 7 years old, I spent the weekend at my dad's house. It was around 2 a.m, and everyone was asleep. My dad was single then, and his roommate worked nights, so it was just the two of us in the house. I woke up suddenly for no reason I could explain. As my eyes adjusted, I looked toward the doorway and saw it. A tall black mass stood there, not solid but dark enough to blot out the room behind it. Its arms were raised like it was saying, "Surprise," in some silent, mocking gesture. My whole body froze. I yanked the blanket over my head and lay there, barely breathing. After a few seconds, I dared to peek again. It was gone. About a year later, it happened again. I was getting ready for bed, sitting up and playing with my stuffed animals. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. That same dark figure walked calmly into my room and vanished. I stopped moving, holding my breath, then dove under my blanket. I didn't come out again for the rest of the night. The third time was early one morning while I was lying in my dad's bed, waiting for him to get ready. I turned toward the nightstand, and there it was, sitting on the open cabinet door just a few feet away. The figure was closer than ever, completely still, staring at me. That was the last time I ever saw it, though I don't remember what happened right after. It's like my memory just cuts out. Years later, when I was about 10 or 11, I caught something strange on video. I was recording a short clip for a school project about building something out of Lego. Everything seemed normal, just me talking. Afterward, I went to the bathroom, then came back and replayed it. At first, everything sounded fine, and then, out of nowhere, I heard this low, guttural sound in the background. I hadn't heard it while filming. It sent chills down my spine. I ran downstairs and showed it to my dad. We uploaded the video to YouTube, but since it was on my school account, the school asked me to delete all my videos later, and it disappeared. Years later, I went looking for it on the same tablet, but the file was completely gone, like it had been erased. I haven't seen the black figure again since then, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still get that same uneasy feeling, like something is standing in the doorway, waiting for me to notice. Story 25. About 10 years ago, my husband convinced me and the rest of my family to go tinker tubing, floating down a creek on inner tubes with a bus dropping you off upstream and picking you up where you parked. He said he had done it as a kid and that it was just a relaxing, hour-long trip down a lazy river. We all thought it sounded fun, so we agreed to go. What none of us realized was that it had been raining for several days straight, and the calm little creek he remembered had turned into something far more dangerous. Even though it was July, the water was freezing cold. Within 5 minutes of getting in, we hit rapids. My tube flipped backward, and even though I'm a strong swimmer and had a life jacket on, I could barely keep my head above water. I finally managed to climb back on, but it felt like the longest minute of my life and set the tone for the rest of the trip. A few minutes later, my aunt flipped over and smashed her tailbone on a rock. Then I got caught in a whirlpool, and my husband dislocated his shoulder, pulling me out. My cousin went over a 10-foot waterfall and got trapped underwater. He thought he was going to drown, but managed to walk along the bottom and claw his way to the surface. He climbed back up and warned the rest of us not to follow that path. I was terrified. I remember clinging to every rock, every branch I could find, just trying to catch my breath and stop shaking. What was supposed to be an hour-long ride took most of my family less than 30 minutes. It took me more than 3 hours. When I finally reached the end point, I was swept past it to the opposite bank. I panicked, watching it get farther and farther away until someone shouted, "It's shallow there! You can stand!" I took a chance, jumped off my tube, and found my footing. When I climbed out, I realized my fingers and face were blue. Once I warmed up, I was okay, but even now, 10 years later, I still get flashbacks of that freezing water and the feeling that I might not make it out. Story 26. I was in my junior year of high school. Our school was huge, so there were 4 different lunch periods, and I had the first one, lunch A. That day, something told me to snack on the chocolate-covered peanuts I kept in my locker before lunch. I sat in the hallway in front of the trophy cases next to the counselor's office, in what we called Yorktown Hall. All the halls were named after Revolutionary War battles because our mascot was the Patriots. Suddenly, teachers started shouting for everyone to head to the gym. No explanation. I grabbed my lunchbox and ran, and if you've ever seen a fat kid run, you know it's serious. Once inside, they locked the doors, herded us up into the bleachers, and told us to turn off our phones. Hours went by. No one knew what was happening, and no one listened when teachers said not to use their phones. Eventually, we found out that someone had called in a threat. A man supposedly hiding in the bathroom in Yorktown Hall, the same one just a few meters from where I'd been sitting. He claimed he had planted bombs in other bathrooms and was planning to shoot up the school. They kept us in that gym from around 10:30 in the morning until about 4:30 in the afternoon, nearly 6 hours of sitting, hungry, and scared. We weren't allowed to leave or use the bathroom for the first few hours. I remember looking down and seeing a boot print on my sandwich where someone had stepped on it. My mom, who worked at a hospital, left early and came to pick me up. When they finally let us go, I saw her in the crowd and ran to her, hugging her so hard I nearly knocked her over. I'll never forget the look on her face when I told her everything. Outside, police and news crews surrounded the school. Parents were parked all along the street because the lot was full. My mom drove me straight to Baskin-Robbins afterward. I was starving, but I couldn't shake how close we had all come to something horrific. Later, we found out the man who made the threat was calling from Kansas. The school completely changed its active shooter protocols after that. Even years later, I still think about how easily it could have gone differently. Story 27. The most terrified I have ever been was in 2004, when I lost all my memory for half an hour. I was 19 at the time, hanging out with friends on a frozen lake. We were driving a minivan across the ice with the side doors open, and I was standing up, holding on to the door frame. My friend thought it would be funny to pretend to punch me, and I kept dodging his fake swings, laughing, until suddenly everything went blank. Apparently, my brain's brilliant survival instinct was to dive headfirst out of a moving vehicle going 40 to 50 kilometers per hour. I hit the ice with my skull. My friends turned the van around and found me lying there snoring. They thought I was faking until someone threw snow in my face and slapped me awake. When I came to, I was already crying and stumbling backward. There were people surrounding me, familiar faces, but I didn't recognize any of them. I understood words. I knew what Earth was, what humans were, but I didn't know where I was, who I was, or if any of it was even real. It was pure terror, like waking up inside someone else's life. About 30 minutes later, my memory came back in pieces. I went to the hospital the next day, and they said everything looked fine. But that half hour, the total blankness, the fear of existing with no context, was the most horrifying experience of my life. Story 28. I used to be a cop. Toward the end of my time on the force, when I'd already decided to quit and go back to school, I asked to be transferred somewhere quiet. One of those remote posts where nothing ever happened. It was perfect for studying for my entrance exams. In the city, backup was always 1 to 3 minutes away. Out here, it was more like 10. One night, tones kicked out over the radio. Emergency in progress. I figured it would be far enough away that I'd just cover the nearby zone while other units handled it. But when the dispatcher gave the address, it was in my area, barely 2 minutes from where I was sitting. The call, home invasion, suspect armed with a knife. I flipped on my lights and sirens and hauled it. When I got there, a woman was outside screaming that her husband and son were still inside with the intruder. My stomach dropped. I didn't have a rifle, only a pistol and 2 extra mags. The department had limited rifles and I wasn't assigned one. I called for backup, but the nearest unit was too far out. It was just me. The house was big, quiet, and too dark. As soon as I stepped in, I could hear shouting coming from deeper inside. Rounding the corner, I saw the father shielding his young son with his own body. Across from them stood a man, sweaty, wild-eyed, holding 2 large kitchen knives. Later, we'd find out he was high on meth and had broken in because he thought it was his house, his childhood home. I leveled my gun and started giving commands loud and clear. He didn't respond, just stared at me, muttering nonsense. The kid was crying, the father trembling but still standing his ground. I was about 15 feet away, aiming center mass, finger tightening on the trigger, trying not to shoot in front of the boy. I gave one last command. The man dropped the knives and went down to his knees. I started to move in. Then he lunged for the knife again. In that split second, I made the decision to fire. But before I could, a flash of motion came from the side. A police K-9 launched out of the darkness and tackled the guy to the floor. I hadn't even known a K-9 unit was on scene. Turns out another officer had released the dog moments earlier from the back of the property. The suspect went down hard, screaming, as the dog held him until I cuffed him. Later, when I reviewed my body cam footage, I was shocked. What had felt like maybe 10 seconds of shouting had actually been nearly 5 minutes. 5 minutes standing there with my gun pointed at a man ready to die or kill.